again, I feel it's very difficult to moderate because it's so different. But Python, you're a little bit different position from the other two because you're more curator or kind of overlooking the project. So would you maybe start with some comment on those two people? Any questions or?
I think it's more a comment or maybe a question, maybe to you, Nanjo-san, in organizing
Again?
the section, is that it seems that almost the word design has become almost meaningless. But why do we still sort of try and cling to it? It seems to be more my question. And in that sense, I think the institutional sort of definition of the, not just definition, but the way it actually works, because the things that that we just saw, that Usman did, and also Benjamin does, there are very specific institutional mechanisms that make them work or make them difficult, or that you have to work through to make this all possible. And so in the case of Benjamin, I don't think I really understood the way you distinguish art and design. I know that you've thought through it very carefully, but theoretically I couldn't really follow that. And when I saw Benjamin's work, for me that looked much more like an art installation, particularly the Syrian work. And is this deliberate? I mean, is this trying to actually break the boundaries? And conceptually, I think we already know, but for me, when the actual effects of that, the performance of that, is more when it comes to the institutions that it becomes important from my perspective. For example, when I'm sort of creating something and I want you to do something, or I want Usman to do something, then I have to work with bureaucracies, with budget, and that is all sort of, and so in that sense, whether you call it art or design really doesn't matter. It's more the kind of existing institutions that you have to work with to get it done. And so for me, this issue is less a theoretical and conceptual issue than it is an institutional one.
Can I
and
answer,
so that sort
Benjamin-san?
of came up to me, you know. That
Yeah, I totally agree. But I chose this Syrian installation especially because I'm working on a different installation, and I took this one especially because people can't find the right position in design. But what is important is when you see an object of design, you have the function. So a design is able to be reproduced. So there is a mechanism and productivism. So the candy is reproducible. I draw the candy, so I give him a form, and he has got a function. So I could say he's a design. But I add is a semantic design. And of course, it's very thin in between art and design according this kind of semantic word. And it's very important to care about it because art could have a function, but design must have a function. And that is the difference.
But the function could be sometimes not really useful for the life, but sometimes quite aesthetics.
Yeah.
Aesthetic. In that case, how you define the differences?
I think it's a question of the reception and the designer. For example, when I draw two circles, I have on one side the use value. And the use has the function. So it's blank, it's design. And on the second end, the second circle is the symbolic value. And the symbolic value were linked too much, according to me, to the art, to the superficiality. Because the symbol is something we could separate. We don't need it. But I don't think we don't need it. And the most important is to try to make a good design. But the good is something very personal. When you take the two circles and you put the circle together, you have a space in between. And this space is a potential. If I say I'm a designer, why people should not try to understand it? I think this is the value of what I say. This is the value, it's a provocative action. Because when you say something, you have to be understandable, but you have to be also not in a compromise things with people around. If I think design is that, this point, I'm going to do some right design in a frame. But if I'm out of the frame, I just do what I want to do. And this is the time we will decide it. But for now, it's me who decide it. And it is a reception. So some people can see art, and some others can see design. But what I'm doing, it's producing something, producing an object who have a value, a symbolic value and a use value. And when you have both, you do design.
In a sense, you're saying that the design definition of design is more individual and subjective. But there is...
Which is a really unconventional, I think, way of approaching the word. I think, for example, Usman's presentation, I think it's all about power, really. And I think you didn't really mention about, data becoming public is a highly political decision. And so when it becomes public, how it becomes public, and whether it's really public, because data is always controlled. Power nowadays, the main thing is who knows what. And so that aspect of it was, I think, I'm really curious about how you approach that issue. And it is an issue of design. It's more than the individual here.
Yeah, I think that might have been a longer talk. But you're absolutely right. That the sort of unwritten or the unsaid is almost as important as the said there. Just like what is made public is as important as what is not made public. Who decides what to measure and not to measure this, or how to measure it, especially in the context of data. I suppose that for me, this question of designing is interesting because, first of all, I'm actually trained as an architect, but in my country, I'm not allowed to call myself an architect because I haven't got my Part 3 exam, right? So the question of institutions and deciding the label of what it is that you do has kind of been decided for me already. So I end up as a designer because I'm not an architect. And sometimes if I'm not a designer or an architect, then I'm an artist. But ultimately, I'm concerned with the decisions about the future of the city. And what that has meant, I suppose, is that every time I start designing something, I get immediately interested in what's the next level up. What's the next level up? What's the next level up? So let's say 10 years ago, as Arduinos were starting to be used to build little interactive projects, I started thinking, okay, well, there's Arduinos, but there's probably lots of them around the world. How do they connect up? And then as I was thinking about how they connect up, and I did some projects about connecting them up, then I got interested in, well, how do you decide what connects to what? And so a project like Natural Fuse came about. And then I started thinking, well, what is the data infrastructure that'll carry the data between these things that are connecting up. And in a sense, that's how Patch Bay came about. And then there were now these dozens of these networks for carrying data. Then I created Thingful to say, okay, what is the thing that is able to sort of bring together all these platforms that are connecting up all these decisions and devices, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, I suppose the task I've set myself is always to question what is the frame of reference within which a design is being done, and kind of always to try and look at the next level up, so as to find ways that everyone else, in a sense, can be part of determining the frame of that perspective, if you see what I mean.
When you say up, it can mean a whole range of things. It can mean scale in the internet and also in physical space. It can mean diversifying related organization. I guess that's the way we can understand that.
Yeah, and I think it means all of those things, if you see what I mean, for me.
Do you feel that you are sort of making a layer or culture or whatever on the city? Because many works are actually done on the city.
Well, it's interesting. I was actually talking with David Benjamin this morning over breakfast, and I related to him an anecdote, which was that an architect who saw my presentation once about these sorts of participatory platforms asked a question afterwards, which was, why is it that I always kind of erase myself from the work? So somebody else always completes it. Somebody else always does the actual design because the platform is there for other people to take over the design. And she expressed this idea that maybe I lacked self-confidence in actually designing. And I think that to that extent, no, I wouldn't claim that I'm materially affecting the culture or deciding these layers of what the city is. But I'd like to think that I'm opening up the possibilities for other people in a very local context to determine what is the appropriate layering of some kind of cultural activity at that location and at that time. It makes it very difficult for us us meaning my team, Umbrellium, to get commissioned, because almost every time people come to us and say, you know, we're interested to commission you to do something, we say, okay, but we can't tell you what it's going to be until it's finished. And sometimes there's this kind of capacity to actually do that and really go and get involved in the community and really throw open the question to them, what is it that we're trying to do? Why are we trying to do it? What is the goal of this participatory platform that we might be deploying in this location? But it does mean that that the question of where is the design, or who is it, or where is the design, or what is the design, it almost becomes meaningless, because it is everything to do with the process and the deployment and the decision making and the questions and the omissions, et cetera, et cetera.
So then what is the city for you? Is it a medium or like a canvas? Or?
That's a really good question. I suppose that the city is a kind of an engine for heterogeneity. It is the best system that we human beings have created for supporting diversity, but still managing to continue as some kind of entity. Almost every other machine that we've created takes a finite set of inputs and has a finite set of outputs. But the city is this kind of wonderful opportunity, a wonderful system for taking unexpected inputs and having totally unexpected outputs. And so I suppose in that capacity, the city for me is a sort of a massive participatory, interactive, idea-creating entity that we're all part of and that we're all contributing to.
Python, what do you think? That you're creating a big city of culture.
I think the past 3 days, for me, the wonderful experience was that it confirmed something about, whether you call it architecture design, that is now very contemporaneous, is that there's a wide range of what architecture design can be. And so from the molecular scale to more traditional, conventional building that is still quite relevant in Korea, as you can see. It's sort of like a stage, but we're very quickly moving away, and then the issues of the shrinking city, of how you change physical entities, physical structures. And then, of course, what we saw with David, what we're seeing with Usman, also with Lex, there are architects, and the issue of whether you call it architecture or not, or design, is seemingly irrelevant at a level of effect and performance. But again, institutionally, these are the difficult sort of realities that you have to work with. Bureaucracies hate that when you don't know what the result is. They ask you to give me a budget and a goal and a project, and then they will give you the budget. But then when you say, I don't know, then the project almost never is established.
But of course, we understand that the institution is always with the bureaucracy. Do you think, can you think about inviting him to do something in your city?
Of course. And that's the thing, I think that's the beauty of the array of things that we've seen, is that one doesn't preclude the other. I think the physicality of traditional architecture always has to be together with these kind of participatory networks, the kind of biological networks that people like David are experimenting. And so philosophically or conceptually, to say that I'm doing this and so the older models are now irrelevant is I think incorrect.
You can make the wires on the city.
Yes, of course, and you need both.
So you have another chance to do some work in Korea. Very good.
Yeah, and so, for example, maybe I'm nitpicking, but when you began with the notion that the individual heroic architect was who made that, is, that's incorrect. I mean, there was never a period where one architect designed. It was a kind of mythology that they created themselves, or society sort of gave them that because it seemed sort of it was a good selling point about, people like heroic things. And so the reality of the older models also is much more complex. It's the kind of history that created these figures who seemingly decided certain things. So I think that there was never a period, maybe even when Louis XIV was reigning in France. Even in that situation, you have to understand that the complexity of the way you create cities. And so I think we have to avoid certain kind of conceptual sort of simplifications, and at a very theoretical level, I think that's what's needed. And then, of course, the practical level, we're all together in this sort of, and it's always a collaborative work. I think curatorial work, architectural work, design was always fundamentally collaborative.
Any comment, Benjamin-san?
I think everybody should go to shops and request candies. I don't think candies in shop is hard. And when I did this installation, I'm talking about the Damascus city. And the Damascus city is, you have a center, and the center is the Souk of Al-Amidiyeh. The Souk of Al-Amidiyeh is the beat of Damascus. And you can find a lot of candies. And I think when I did this installation, I did not ask myself if I should have to do art or design. I just did it, and I reproduced candies to talk about the beat of this city, and it is the most important for me, actually.
Good. Now the time is up, but maybe we can take some questions from the floor. もし会場から質問
If there are any questions from the floor, maybe we can take one or two. Anyone? Any questions? Okay. In the earlier session, we saw the hands shoot up immediately. Maybe none? Yes, go ahead. Or on.
Yeah, thanks so much for those three amazing talks. Just, I suppose, more of a comment, but also I want to hear from you that you know that you're successful when places like America makes what you do illegal. So things like the state of Wyoming now making it illegal for citizens to collect and share environmental data, or the slaughterhouse gag. We talked about slaughterhouse before, that actually it's illegal in America now to share images of slaughterhouses because people might lose appetite. So, and this is supposed to be a democracy. And if this is kind of the pushback for the type of things that you're doing, how you push back again in order to respond to that?
I think that was a great comment. I don't have a particular response to it, except to sort of tie that with what you were talking about, bureaucracies, and just point to the work of Dan Hill, who talks about dark matter in cities as the kind of the stuff that you'd never quite see into, that's making these kinds of decisions on your behalf, and is sometimes impinging on your, as an individual, your decision making, and sometimes is exceeding too. So I think there is a sort of interaction certainly between the two.
Okay. Maybe the time is gone, so we'd like to close this session, but thank you very much. Okay. Very interesting, sometimes very abstract, sometimes very concrete, and sometimes big city making. We enjoyed it very much. Thank you.